They took my kids. The HOA actually grabbed them saying I had broken their special neighborhood rules. Why? Because they thought I had bought a house where only old people over 55 can live, except I didn't. My lawyer showed that my house was outside their area, but the HOA didn't know who they were picking a fight with. Because I'm not just any regular dad, I'm a federal judge, and they just made the biggest mistake of their sad little lives. How far would you go if the HOA took your family? Welcome to my channel. If you love crazy HOA payback stories, hit that subscribe button, because this one is nuts. The morning started like any other coffee, making the smell of toast in the kitchen, and my two kids, Alex and Sophie, talking about their soccer game coming up. I was looking at papers for a big court case when I heard papers being pushed through my mail slot. Another letter from the HOA. I sighed, already ready for another silly complaint about my grass being too tall or my mailbox being the wrong color. But when I opened the letter, I couldn't breathe. Final warning. You are breaking HOA living rules. You must move out right now. All kids who aren't allowed must leave within 24 hours. If you don't do this, we will take more action. Looked confused. Kids who aren't allowed. I read it again, my heart starting to beat fast. My house, a pretty 3-bedroom house, sat outside of their neighborhood lines. When I bought it, I had checked with my lawyer that my house was not part of their HOA. I even had maps from the county proving it. But now these nosy people were saying I had broken their so-called age rule, saying no one under 55 could live in the neighborhood. I threw the letter on the counter and grabbed my phone. Elliot, we have a problem, I said when my lawyer answered. The HOA is trying to kick out my kids. Elliot sighed. We went through this. When you bought the house, your house is not part of the HOA area. It's just them trying to scare you. I'll send a letter telling them to stop today. That should have been the end of it. A small problem. A typical HOA going too far. But I didn't know just how crazy these people were willing to get. The next day I came home to scary silence. No laughing. No video game sounds. No dishes clinking. Just silence. Fear crept up my back. Alex, Sophie, I yelled. Running inside the house was totally empty. My stomach felt sick as I saw both their backpacks sitting by the door, not touched from this morning. Their shoes were still lined up neat. My gut told me something was very wrong. I grabbed my phone and called my son straight to voicemail. My daughter, same thing. The fear turned ice cold. I called their friends, parents. No one had seen them. My hands were shaking as I called 911. The person on the phone was calm but serious. Sir, are you reporting missing people? I opened my mouth, but my throat was dry. Yes, my two kids. They're gone. The next 2 hours were crazy officers coming looking through the house, asking me the same questions. Over and over, when did I last see them? Did I notice anything weird? Any enemies as a federal judge? I had lots of enemies, but no criminal had ever dared to come near my kids. Then an officer standing by my mailbox turned, looking confused. Sir, what? Found this. He held out another HOA letter. This one taped to my door. My fingers squeezed the paper as I read, since your people who aren't allowed have failed to leave. The HOA has taken steps to make sure you follow the rules. Your kids will be kept in a safe place until this problem is fixed. My vision got blurry with anger. I had worked on hundreds of federal cases. I had seen criminal groups, human traffickers, crooked politicians, but never had I seen a damn HOA kidnap kids. The officers read over my shoulder, their faces changing from confused to shocked. Did your HOA just admit to taking your kids? One officer asked, not believing what he heard. I breathed out hard, hands shaking. Yes, I said, trying to stay calm. And they have no idea who they just messed with. A search started right away. Officers filled the neighborhood, knocking on doors, asking HOA board members questions. But suddenly, no one seemed to know anything. My neighbor, Ms. Harper, an old woman who always baked cookies for my kids, pulled me aside. Judge, I saw something strange this morning, she whispered, looking around nervously. 2 men in suits, never seen them before, came to your house after you left. Your kids got into a black SUV. They didn't look scared, but they didn't look happy either. My heart pounded. Where did they go? They drove toward the HOA clubhouse, she said, lowering her voice. I thought maybe they were being taken to some after-school thing. But now she stopped talking, fear in her eyes that was enough for me. I turned to the officers. We're going to that clubhouse now. The police came with me as I stormed through the HOA front doors. Karen Wills, the bossy president of this power-crazy group, sat behind a huge wooden desk, smiling. Like a mean snake. Judge Carter, I was waiting for you, she said sweetly, fixing her pearl necklace. How dare you? I slammed the letter on her desk, voice shaking with anger. Where are my kids? Karen tilted her head, acting innocent. Your illegal people have been moved to a better place until this problem is sorted out. The officers beside me looked at each other uneasily. I forced myself to breathe. That's kidnapping, I said, voice dangerously quiet. Do you understand what you've done? Karen's eyes lit up. Oh, please don't be so dramatic. They're at a board-approved temporary guardian place while we finish removing them. My nails dug into my hands. This crazy woman actually believed what she was saying. Where are they? I said each word carefully, because if I didn't, I might have grabbed her neck right there. She let out a breathy laugh. Somewhere safe. Now, I think you should stop making a scene, Judge Carter. After all, the HOA has rules. Rules, she had stolen my kids. And she was talking about rules, but she had made a deadly mistake. She thought she had won. I turned to the officers. You heard her, she's openly admitting to holding kids without permission. The main officer, a man who had clearly dealt with HOA nonsense before, but never, at this level, stood up straight. Mrs. Wills, if you don't tell us where the kids are right now, you'll be charged with serious, unlawful holding conspiracy and putting kids in danger. Karen's smile dropped, but she held her ground. This is a civil matter. Officer, we are just enforcing neighborhood standards. Shut the hell up, I snapped, finally, letting my anger show. I'm a federal judge, you crazy woman. Do you really think I don't know the law? This isn't a civil matter. This is federal kidnapping. Karen's confidence broke. She wasn't used to people fighting back. She was used to winning through scaring people and paperwork, but not today. Not against me. She licked her lips, moving nervously. Before she could finish, an officer stepped behind her, pulling out handcuffs. Mrs. Wills, you're under arrest for unlawful holding. Wait, she screamed, fighting as they put handcuffs on her wrists. They're at Lakewood Christian Academy. I didn't wait. I didn't talk. I ran. I drove like a crazy person. The speed limit meant nothing. Red lights blurred past as I sped toward Lakewood Christian Academy. My tires screaming with every sharp turn, the police sirens blaring behind me, but I barely heard them. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight that my knuckles turned white. My heart hammering in my chest. They had my kids, that psycho. HOA thought they could kidnap my kids and treat them like things in their little rulebook. They had no idea what they'd just done the second I pulled into the school's parking lot. I threw my car into park and ran out the door before the engine even stopped. Officers were already rushing past me toward the entrance. The school looked totally normal. Kids playing on the playground, parents picking up their kids, but I knew somewhere inside Alex and Sophie were being held against their will under some made-up excuse. My mind raced through every possible legal thing they had charged me with, what lies they had told. But it didn't matter. This was kidnapping. This was a crime. And I was about to make sure every last person involved paid for it. The principal, a worried-looking man in his 60s, met us at the front office. What is the meaning of this? He stammered as uniformed officers flooded inside Sir the Main. Officer said, holding up the HOA notice, do you have 2 kids here under the custody of the Willow Creek HOA? The principal blinked clearly, confused. Oh yes, but where are they? I cut in my voice like ice. The man swallowed hard and pointed toward the back hallway, room 214, but I didn't wait. I ran my shoes pounding against the tile. Room 214. Room 214. My blood roared in my ears as I grabbed the handle and shoved the door open with so much force that it slammed against the wall. There they were, My kids. Alex and Sophie sat at two desks looking scared, but okay. A woman in a stiff navy suit stood beside them, her eyes getting wide in shock as I stormed in. "Who the hell are you?" she snapped, stepping between me and my kids. I ignored her, rushing forward and pulling them both into my arms. "Dad," Sophie cried, holding my shirt. "We didn't know what was happening. They took us." "It's okay, baby," I whispered, holding her tight. "I'm here now." Alex's arms wrapped around me, just as tight, his small body shaking. I would burn the world down. For this moment, the woman in the suit cleared her throat clearly, still thinking she had power here. "Mr. Carter," she said, "you have no right to be here. These kids were placed under temporary HOA guardianship." "Shut up." My voice was so low, so mean that the entire room froze. The officer stormed in behind me. "Mom," one of them said, "step away from the kids." She laughed. "I don't think you understand. The HOA has legal grounds to you." "I'm not the government," I snapped. "You are not the police. You are not a legal group with power over anything. And you sure as hell don't have the right to hold kids." She opened her mouth to argue, but I turned to the officer. "Arrest her." The main cop didn't wait. "Ma'am, you are under arrest for unlawful holding and conspiracy to commit kidnapping." "What? This is crazy." Her words were cut off as the officer spun her around and locked handcuffs on her wrists. I pulled my kids behind me, protecting them as she screamed, "This is an outrage. We are a legal governing body. No, you're a glorified neighborhood watch with a power problem," I spat, "and you're about to learn what real legal power looks like." The legal war starts by the time I got back home. HOA board members were already panicking. They knew they'd messed up. I could feel it in the air, in the nervous looks from my neighbors, in the way HOA members were suddenly pretending they had nothing to do with what had just happened, but they weren't getting away with it. Karen Wills, the smug HOA president, had already been booked at the county jail for kidnapping and conspiracy. Now I had bigger plans. I called Elliot, my lawyer, and told him to get the papers ready. We were taking the HOA down. "This isn't just a civil lawsuit," I said. Pacing my office, "I want criminal charges across the board: wire fraud, illegal holding, conspiracy, abuse of power, and racketeering." Elliot let out a low whistle. "You're going for the kill." "They took my kids." "Elliot," I said coldly, "they kidnapped them and they thought they could get away with it. I don't just want them fined. I want them destroyed." The next morning, I filed an official federal lawsuit against the Willow Creek HOA. The charges were brutal. The lawsuit named every single board member who had signed off on my kids' removal, hitting them with federal charges that would make sure none of them ever saw the outside of a courtroom again. Then I went a step further. See, the one thing Karen and her little friends never expected was that I had access to court resources that they couldn't even imagine. I pulled every financial document from their HOA records. I subpoenaed their bank statements, their internal messages, and their so-called legal fees. And what I found? Oh, it was beautiful. They had been stealing money from residents for years. Fake fines, fake maintenance fees, shell companies funneling money into board members, private accounts. The entire operation was a scam. Not only had they kidnapped my kids, but they had been robbing every single person in this neighborhood for nearly a decade. Elliot called me 2 days later, barely containing his laughter. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "Karen's lawyer just called me. She's trying to make a plea deal." I smirked. "What's she offering? She'll admit to the kidnapping if we drop the financial fraud charges." I chuckled darkly. "Absolutely not. I wanted all of them in jail." 2 weeks later, the entire HOA collapsed. Every board member was charged on multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and illegal holding. Karen was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. The HOA was shut down permanently, and every single illegal fine they had ever given was refunded with damages, and me. I sat on my front porch, sipping a cup of coffee, watching my kids play in the yard, knowing that the HOA would never ever bother another family again. They tried to take my kids, but they forgot who I was, and I made sure they paid for it. The fallout from the arrests hit the neighborhood like a wrecking ball. Residents whispered in quiet tones, news crews camped outside the once-perfect HOA clubhouse, and the remaining board members scrambled like cockroaches in the light. But I wasn't done. I had spent years in courtrooms watching criminals attempt last-minute power grabs, and I knew exactly what came next. They were going to try to save themselves, and they did. First came the smear campaign. Flyers appeared on doorsteps claiming I had misused judicial influence to unfairly attack the HOA online community groups filled with posts about how I had manipulated law enforcement and how I was a dangerous tyrant who didn't respect the rules. Of the community, a few die-hard HOA loyalists, a group of retirees who probably frame their HOA violation notices like war medals, clung to the idea that the board had been acting in their best interest. But the truth was out, and no amount of gossip could erase the fact that the HOA had kidnapped 2 kids and defrauded an entire neighborhood for years. It would have been laughable if it wasn't so pathetic they had already lost, and I was about to make sure they stayed down a week after Karen's arrest. I received an email from the HOA remaining legal counselor, a desperate, sniveling lawyer named Brent Holloway, who had clearly been hired in a panic after the board's usual lawyers either fled or were arrested. The subject line was laughable: settlement proposal for HOA reformation. I opened the email, scanning through the message, and nearly burst out laughing. They were trying to bring back the HOA. The surviving board members were claiming that Karen had been acting alone and that the HOA itself was an essential governing body for community integrity. They offered to drop all fines, refund a portion of stolen money, and promised never to interfere with my family again. If I agreed to back down and withdraw my lawsuit, I stared at the screen for a moment, then calmly forwarded the email to Elliot. My lawyer, my response. Not only was I rejecting their offer, but I was filing an additional motion to freeze all HOA funds, preventing them from using stolen money to fund their legal defense. Within hours, a judge approved it. Every remaining dime in the HOA accounts was locked. That was the final nail in the coffin. The board was now legally powerless. They couldn't hire a legal team. They couldn't issue fines. They couldn't even pay their electric bill. The HOA was officially bankrupt. Then the foreclosure started. Turns out when you commit years of financial fraud, the government tends to want that money back. The IRS got involved. The county tax assessor office launched an investigation. The board members' personal accounts were audited, and wouldn't you know it, every single one of them had been skimming money for years. Karen had been paying herself an undisclosed salary directly from HOA funds. The vice president had been using community fees to finance his vacation home. The treasurer had been laundering money through fake maintenance contracts. It was a beautiful disaster. Civil suits piled up as wronged residents came out of the woodwork demanding restitution, and one by one, the houses belonging to the former board members went up for auction. That's when I made my final move. See, the HOA had spent years terrorizing people, manipulating rules and extorting families out of thousands, but now they were vulnerable. And I knew exactly how to finish this fight. I called Elliot. How many board members have been forced to sell their homes? I asked. He did some quick calculations, at least 7. Why, I smiled, because I want to buy them. The plan was simple. I was going to own their legacy. I wasn't just going to dismantle the HOA. I was going to erase it from existence with Elliot's help. I quietly funneled my earnings into real estate acquisitions, snapping up every board member's property as they went into foreclosure. Within 6 months, I owned the majority of the properties that once belonged to the most powerful HOA members. And when I had control of enough homes, I held a neighborhood-wide vote to permanently dissolve the HOA. The turnout was overwhelming. The vote passed with 92% approval, the remaining 8%, mostly the die-hard HOA fanatics, had no choice but to accept defeat. I watched the final meeting with satisfaction. The HOA official dissolution was marked by the removal of the Willow Creek HOA sign that had once greeted residents at the neighborhood entrance. I personally hired a demolition crew to rip it out of the ground and watched as it was reduced to rubble. No more fines, no more abuse of power. No more entitled board members dictating people's lives. My neighborhood was finally free, and Karen, well, she wasn't smiling anymore. She had pleaded guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence, but she still got 8 years in prison. The rest of the board members received varying sentences for conspiracy, fraud, and embezzlement. Every single one of them had a criminal record. Now no HOA, no power, no future in our neighborhood. The next morning, I sat on my front porch with a cup of coffee watching my kids play in the yard. Finally safe. Finally free from the insanity that had plagued us for months. Sophie was laughing, kicking a soccer ball to Alex, who was smiling like nothing had ever happened. I felt a deep sense of satisfaction settled in my chest. The HOA thought they could take my kids. They thought they could manipulate the law-wield power. They never truly had, and silence me. But they forgot one crucial fact. I'm a federal judge and I don't lose. The HOA was dead, but I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Winning in court, dismantling their power and watching their homes go up for auction had been satisfying, but I knew how people like them operated. Scum like this always try to crawl back the moment they got out of prison. They try to weasel their way into some new HOA or worse, move to another neighborhood and start this cycle all over again. No, that wasn't going to happen. I was going to make damn sure the Willow Creek HOA wasn't just dead. It was buried so deep that no one would even whisper its name again. So I got to work the first step. Legislation. I had spent my career in the court system, and I knew that HOA abuse wasn't just a problem in my neighborhood. It was everywhere. People across the country had been harassed, fined, extorted, and even forced out of their homes by power-hungry HOA boards who thought they were above the law. I had just exposed one of the worst offenders, and I wasn't about to waste this momentum. I contacted a few senators and state representatives I had worked with on federal cases, and I laid everything out: the kidnapping, the fraud, the illegal spying, the financial abuse. I provided proof, documents, emails, recordings, even police reports detailing the extent of the corruption. And just like that, I had their attention. Within a month, I was standing in a packed legislative hearing, testifying before state lawmakers about the systematic corruption of HOAs and how unchecked power had nearly ruined my family's life. I made my case clear. HOAs needed stronger legal oversight caps on fines, mandatory external audits, and most importantly, criminal liability for board members who abuse their positions. The result: new laws were passed. The HOA Accountability Act was born, and with it, HOAs across the state were stripped of the unchecked power they had enjoyed for decades. No more absurd fines. No more shady accounting. No more HOA boards running neighborhoods like personal kingdoms. They would be watched, regulated, and prosecuted if they stepped out of line. But that was just step one. Step two: public humiliation. I wasn't going to let Karen and her goons fade into obscurity. They weren't just criminals. They were examples of what happened when people abuse power. I leaked everything to the press: every fraudulent document, every shady financial transaction, every smug email where they mocked homeowners for being too scared to fight back. News outlets ate it up. Local HOA president sentenced to prison after illegally kidnapping kids. Judge exposes multi-million-dollar HOA fraud scheme. State cracks down on HOA corruption after shocking case of abuse and financial theft. Karen's mugshot was everywhere. Her once perfect reputation completely destroyed. No company would hire her. No respectable neighborhood would accept her. She was poison. The other board members weren't spared. Either their names were forever tied to one of the biggest HOA scandals in state history. They had gone from smug rulers of a suburban empire to social outcasts overnight. Step 3. The HOA final financial ruin. See, even though the HOA had been dismantled and their funds had been frozen, I knew there was one last way: to make them suffer the lawsuits. The people in my neighborhood who had been wronged by this corrupt organization, I helped them sue every single resident who had been unfairly fined, threatened, or extorted was now suing the former board members, personally, and I made sure those lawsuits stuck. I personally paid for the best legal team money could buy to represent the victims pro bono. The result: bankruptcy one by one. The former HOA leaders were hit with civil judgments. They could never recover from Karen, lost her home, her car, her savings, everything. The vice president who had used HOA funds to finance a vacation home foreclosed the treasurer who had funneled money into shell companies, now drowning in legal debt. These people had spent years ruining others financially. Now they were getting a taste of their own medicine, and just when they thought it couldn't get worse, I took away their future step 4, blacklisting thanks to my connections in legal and financial circles. I made sure every major real estate firm, homeowner association network, and corporate hiring office knew exactly who these people were. They wouldn't be able to run another HOA, get a job in property management, or even rent a decent apartment without someone recognizing them from the scandal. Their power-hungry games were over. They had no home, no money, no influence, and no way to rebuild. They were officially ruined. I didn't stop there. Step 5, turning their legacy into a joke. The former HOA clubhouse, the place where these people held their illegal meetings, orchestrated their fraud, and lauded their fake power over innocent homeowners. I bought it. That's right, during one of the many auctions for their seized assets, I made sure to personally purchase the HOA clubhouse, and what did I do with it? Turned it into a community centre. No more board meetings, no more violation notices, just a place for the neighbourhood to come together. We put in a swimming pool, we added a basketball court, we made sure the place became a symbol of freedom from HOA tyranny. People loved it. And Karen, the last time I saw her was in court. She was being formally sentenced, tears in her eyes. Her designer clothes swapped for an orange jumpsuit, her hands shackled. She begged for leniency. She cried about how she had only been trying to uphold the integrity of the community. I leaned forward, meeting her dead in the eyes. You kidnapped my kids. I said, my voice low. And even you stole from innocent families. You thought you were above the law. You deserve everything that's happening to you. She tried to respond, but the judge banged the gavel. 10 years, no parole. It was over. And just like that, the Willow Creek HOA ceased to exist. No corrupt board. No ridiculous rules, no illegal fines. Just a peaceful, happy neighborhood. I had turned their empire into dust. And now, every time I sat on my porch, drinking my morning coffee, watching my kids play without fear, I smiled because I knew that no HOA would ever dare mess with me again. The Willow Creek HOA was dead. Its leaders were in prison, its stolen money returned, and its former headquarters now a community center where kids played and families gathered without fear of absurd fines or overreaching rules. But as I sat on my porch sipping my coffee and watching the sun rise over my peaceful HOA-free neighborhood, I knew I wasn't finished, because the truth is, HOAs aren't just a local problem. What happened here? The fraud, the financial abuse, the kidnapping. It was happening everywhere across the country. Homeowners were being bullied, extorted, and manipulated by the very organizations that were supposed to protect them. And I was not going to let it happen again. I had seen firsthand what unchecked HOA power could do. I had fought and destroyed one of the worst. But that wasn't enough. If I really wanted to make a difference, if I really wanted to ensure that no one else would ever have to go through what my family had endured, I needed to make sure HOAs across the country were permanently crippled. Step 1. Setting a legal precedent. My court case against the HOA had already shattered the local system, but I wanted to take it national with Elliot's help. I worked to turn my case into a legal precedent that could be used against corrupt HOAs everywhere. We drafted amendments to the HOA Accountability Act, ensuring that any HOA that engaged in illegal holding fraud or abuse of power would face automatic federal review, no more hiding behind vague state laws or private contracts. If they committed crimes, they would face real, tangible consequences. I worked with lawmakers, testified in hearings, and made sure that the loopholes that had allowed Karen and her ilk to operate unchecked were permanently closed. It took months, but in the end, we won the revised laws. passed unanimously, and suddenly HOAs across the country found themselves under the strictest oversight they had ever seen. The power they had abused for decades gone. Step 2. Destroying their financial backbone. HOAs thrived on fear and money. They made their power seem absolute by scaring people into compliance, and they funded their operations by issuing bogus fines and excessive fees. So I made sure they could do neither. I funded a new legal organization, the Homeowners Defense Fund, its sole purpose, helping homeowners fight back. We provided free legal aid to anyone being unfairly targeted by an HOA. We educated people on their rights, showed them how to fight illegal fines, and helped them overturn fraudulent property restrictions. And when HOAs realized they were losing money, that the endless stream of fines and fees that had once lined their pockets were now being challenged in court and struck down, they started collapsing one by one. Abusive HOAs began to dissolve, unable to sustain themselves without their extortion racket. And the best part, homeowners were winning their neighborhoods. Back step 3, exposing the HOA industry. This wasn't just about small-time HOA boards run by power-hungry retirees. There were corporations behind this, massive property management firms that trained and funded HOAs to maximize profit, that lobbied for weaker regulations, that used fraudulent accounting to siphon money from homeowners under the guise of community upkeep. They had been untouchable for years, hiding behind legal protections, keeping their finances sealed under private contracts. But now I knew their game, and I had every intention of blowing it wide open. I spent months gathering insider information, working with journalists and former HOA board members who had been pressured into corruption. What we uncovered was staggering: massive embezzlement, illegal kickbacks from construction firms, secretive slush funds used to manipulate local politics. It was an industry of control built on the idea that no one would ever fight back, but they hadn't counted on me. The resulting exposé was devastating. News networks ran headline after headline about the deep-rooted corruption in HOAs. Investigations were launched at the state and federal levels, and within months the biggest property management firms responsible for funding corrupt HOAs were hit with lawsuits, government audits, and massive fines. Their stock prices plummeted. Their executives resigned in disgrace, and soon they started shutting down entirely. Step 4. Erasing HOA power forever. With their legal shield shattered, their finances crippled, and their corporate backing gone, HOAs were no longer the unchallengeable forces they once were. But I wanted to go one step further. I wanted to destroy their very existence. So I launched the Abolish HOAs initiative. It started as a simple petition, movement, a call for homeowners to reject HOA governments in their neighborhoods. It caught fire. People who had been terrorized by their HOAs for years, those who had been fined into bankruptcy, who had lost their homes, who had been bullied and harassed over the smallest infractions, came forward in droves. Millions signed on. Entire neighborhoods voted to dissolve their HOAs. Laws were proposed to make HOA membership voluntary rather than mandatory, ensuring that no one could ever be forced into one again. And then came the final blow, step 5, making HOAs a national joke. The final nail in the coffin wasn't a law or a lawsuit. It was public humiliation. For years, HOAs had maintained power because they were seen as legitimate people, feared them, respected their authority. But once we exposed them, once we made them a laughing stock, their influence evaporated. Late-night hosts mocked them relentlessly. Memes about insane HOA violations flooded the internet. Documentaries about corrupt HOAs and their downfall became some of the most watched films of the year. It became social suicide to admit you had been an HOA president. These people who once thrived on control and intimidation were now laughing stocks. No one feared them anymore, and that was the real victory. I knew we had truly won when 1 year after Karen Will's sentencing, I received an email from a former HOA board member who had taken down. It was short, pathetic, desperate. "I lost everything. I can't get a job. I can't even rent an apartment. Please, I need help." I stared at the message for a long moment, remembering the arrogant, smug woman who had tried to take my kids, who had thought she could ruin lives and walk away unscathed. Then without hesitation, I deleted it. She had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences as I sat back on my porch, watching my kids run across the yard, free, safe, happy. I knew that HOAs would never terrorize another family again. And if they ever tried, they'd have to answer to me, because I wasn't just the man who destroyed the Willow Creek HOA. I was the man who destroyed all of them.